Do you remember when Canadian candy aisles felt different? When the corner store had treats you couldn't find anywhere else in the world? When you'd save your allowance all week just to walk down to the variety store and choose something sweet that was uniquely, unmistakably ours? Today, we're taking a nostalgic trip back to the candy brands that shaped Canadian childhoods. The ones that disappeared from shelves, leaving only memories and the faint ghost of that particular sweetness. Let's remember them together, because they weren't just candy. They were part of growing up Canadian. These weren't just treats you grabbed at the checkout. They were the reward after helping with grocery shopping, the prize for a good report card, the treasure you'd find in your grandmother's purse or your grandfather's coat pocket. They had names that sounded old-fashioned even when they were new, flavors that felt distinctly ours, wrappers you could spot from across the store. But one by one, they vanished. Corporate mergers happened. Tastes changed. American brands took over more shelf space. And suddenly, the candy that felt like home was just gone. If you grew up eating these, you're a true Canadian. And if you remember racing to the variety store to buy them, you'll understand exactly what we lost. If any of these take you back, drop a comment and tell us where in Canada you grew up and which candy you miss the most. And if you love these trips down memory lane, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's start with a candy that came in a little box and tasted like childhood itself. Number 1. Malted milk. Remember those little cardboard cartons with the red and white design? Malted milk wasn't just candy. It was pocket money transformed into pure, chalky sweetness that melted on your tongue. For generations of Canadian kids, these small boxes were the sound of childhood. You'd shake them first, hearing that satisfying rattle of the little tablets inside. Then you'd tear open the top and tip a few into your palm. They looked almost like pills, but they tasted like dessert mixed with something vaguely wholesome, something your grandparents remembered from their own childhoods. The flavor was distinct, malty, sweet, with that characteristic chalky texture that dissolved slowly if you let it sit on your tongue or crunched satisfyingly if you bit down. Your fingers would be dusted with that fine powder afterward. The smell was slightly medicinal but comforting, like the memory of being sick and getting something that was technically good for you but tasted like a treat. You could buy them at corner stores, at the checkout counter at the grocery store, from the milk delivery truck if you were lucky. Grandparents kept them in purses and coat pockets, ready to offer one during long church services or boring shopping trips. Kids would sit on curbs after school, comparing candy hauls. Malted milk always felt like the underdog choice, the one that wasn't flashy but was reliably good. You could trade them during recess, though they weren't as valuable as chocolate bars. But for those who loved them, nothing else would do. They were a Lowney's product, part of that old guard of Canadian confectionery that felt wholesome and nostalgic even when they were still on shelves. The packaging barely changed over decades. That red and white box was a constant. But by the 1990s and 2000s, tastes were shifting. Kids wanted chocolate bars with caramel and peanuts. They wanted sour candies that made your face scrunch up. They wanted gummy worms and candy that came in neon colors. Malted milk felt too old-fashioned, too simple. And for Hershey Canada, which had acquired Lowney's, it didn't make sense to keep producing something with such small profit margins when shelf space was precious. By the early 2000s, they were gone, just like that. Now, you might spot them occasionally in old-stock variety stores or specialty nostalgia shops that carry retro Canadian candy. People mention them in online forums, sharing memories, and asking if anyone else remembers. The empty shelf space where they used to sit is now filled with trendy sour candies and American imports. There have been occasional limited reissues over the years, but they never quite stick around. For those who grew up shaking that little red and white box, the memory is sweeter than the candy ever was. And that rattling sound? That's a ghost now, too. Number 2. Chocolate Licks. If you grew up in the 70s, 80s, or early 90s, You knew the thrill of finding chocolate licks at the checkout. That bright yellow wrapper with bold red lettering, the promise of rich chocolate syrup you could squeeze straight into your mouth like you were some kind of candy rebel. This wasn't chocolate you unwrapped and bit into like a civilized person. This was liquid chocolate in a squeezable plastic tube, and it felt absolutely illicit. The ritual started the moment you got your hands on one. You'd twist off the cap, and that sweet cocoa smell would hit you immediately. Then came the squeeze. If you were careful, you could control the flow, letting it pool on your tongue. If you were excited or impatient, you'd squeeze too hard and end up with chocolate all over your face, your hands, your shirt. Mothers everywhere learned to recognize the telltale brown stains. The tube would get warm on hot summer days, making the chocolate even more liquid and messy, but that was part of the fun. Kids bought them at corner stores and variety shops, grabbing them on the way home from school. They were impulse buys at grocery store checkout lanes, the kind of thing you'd beg your parents for while they were unloading the cart. In summer, they were the perfect treat when you were out playing road hockey or riding bikes. Some kids packed them in lunchboxes, though teachers weren't always thrilled about the mess potential. The goal was always to get every last drop out, squeezing from the bottom and rolling the tube up as you went. There were races to see who could finish first without getting chocolate everywhere. Spoiler, nobody won those races clean. You'd sit on the front steps with friends, comparing who had made the biggest mess, laughing at chocolate-covered faces. The stickiness lingered on your fingers long after the chocolate was gone. And that last squeeze, when you'd finally extracted everything and the tube made that defeated crinkle sound, pure satisfaction. Chocolate Licks was made by Nestlé Canada, and they marketed it as exactly what it was: fun, messy, rebellious candy for kids who wanted to eat chocolate the wrong way. It was interactive in a way that solid chocolate bars weren't. You controlled the experience. You decided how much, how fast, how messy. But that same messiness eventually became a problem. By the 2000s, parents were pushing back harder on overly sugary products. The mess factor that made it fun also made it inconvenient. Nestlé was streamlining their Canadian product offerings, and Chocolate Licks didn't make the cut. Some people swear they remember it lasting into the mid-2000s, finding tubes in discount bins at rural variety stores. Others insist it was gone by 2000. Memory is funny that way, especially with childhood treats. What's certain is that, eventually, it disappeared completely. Now it lives on only in memory, in online nostalgia groups where Canadians debate whether they remember the taste correctly or if they're just remembering the feeling of getting away with eating chocolate from a tube. The bright yellow wrapper is gone from shelves, replaced by more acceptable chocolate bars. But for those who squeezed every drop, the memory is still sticky and sweet. Number 3. Pal O' Mine. There was a time when the perfect Canadian chocolate bar had a name that sounded like friendship itself. Pal O' Mine. The pale pink wrapper stood out on candy racks like it had wandered in from another era, which, in a way, it had. This wasn't your standard chocolate bar. Open one up and you'd find something unexpected. Coconut and cherry mixed together in milk chocolate. Not coconut and chocolate. Not cherry and chocolate. Both. Together. A flavor combination that felt distinctly retro even when it was still being made. The wrapper was soft pink, almost pastel, with simple lettering that never got updated to look modern or flashy. The bar itself had that pale vintage appearance, like it had been designed in the 1950s and nobody saw a reason to change it. And the taste? That was the divisive part. The coconut was shredded and chewy. The cherry flavor was artificial, but in that nostalgic way that reminded you of cherry cough syrup or those bright red candies your grandmother kept in a crystal dish. Some people loved it. Others couldn't get past the combination. If you loved Pal O' Mine, you were loyal. You'd check the corner store every visit to see if they still had it in stock. You'd share halves with your pal, hence the name, arguing good-naturedly about whether the coconut or the cherry was stronger. Grandparents kept them in cupboards as special treats, alongside other candies that seemed to exist in some timeless space between decades. The chewiness made them last longer than a regular chocolate bar, which felt like getting more value for your money. At school, they were good trading currency, though not everyone wanted them. The unusual flavor meant you could sometimes negotiate a better deal. Some kids had never even heard of them. Others grew up on them and defended them fiercely. It was regional, too. They seemed more popular in certain provinces, though nobody could quite agree on which ones. Memory plays tricks that way. Pal-O-Mine started as a Nielsen product, one of those classic Canadian confectionery brands with decades of history. Then came the acquisitions. Cadbury bought Nielsen. The pink-wrapped bar kept going for a while, but corporate consolidation has a way of killing off the quirky products. By the late 1990s, distribution became spotty. Some stores still carried them, others didn't. You'd find them in one town and not the next. The problem was simple. The flavor combination had fallen out of fashion. Younger consumers wanted chocolate and caramel, chocolate and peanut butter, chocolate and cookie bits. Coconut and cherry felt like something their grandparents ate. And for a company managing dozens of products, the math was straightforward. Lower volume meant higher per-unit costs. Shelf space was valuable. By the early 2000s, Cadbury made the decision. Pal-O-Mine was discontinued. For a brief time after, you could still find them in specialty stores carrying retro Canadian candy. Those pink wrappers would appear like artifacts in shops that catered to nostalgia. But eventually, even those dried up. Now they're completely gone from shelves. The pink wrapper only shows up in vintage candy wrapper collections or old photographs. What remains is the memory of a chocolate bar that tasted like it came from a different time, because it did. And for those who loved it, nothing else has quite filled that spot. Number 4. Rum and Butter. The brown wrapper with gold lettering. The grown-up name that made kids feel sophisticated. Rum and Butter was the candy that tasted like you were getting away with something special. Not because it actually contained rum, it didn't, but because that word on the wrapper made it feel like adult candy, like you'd graduated from the kid stuff and were ready for something more refined. The wrapper itself was elegant. Deep brown with gold script that looked almost fancy, like something you'd find in a box of expensive chocolates. Unwrapping it felt like an event. You'd peel back the paper slowly, savoring the anticipation. Then came the hard crack when you bit down, if you bit down. Most people let it sit on their tongue, melting gradually, releasing that warm butter-rum flavor that coated your whole mouth. It was butterscotch, but elevated, richer, more complex. The kind of flavor that felt warming even on a cold day. This was the candy grandparents always seemed to have. In coat pockets, in purses, in the little dish on the coffee table, teachers kept them in desk drawers. Receptionists at doctors' offices offered them while you waited. Being given one felt like being trusted with something grown-up. You weren't getting a lollipop or a gummy bear, you were getting rum and butter. That meant something. Kids would save them for special occasions. Long car rides to visit relatives in Saskatchewan or New Brunswick. Boring Sunday afternoons. The bus ride home from school when it was too cold to walk. You'd keep one in your winter coat pocket, and months later you'd find it again, still wrapped, and it would taste exactly the same. There was something reliable about that. The flavor lasted a long time, too. One rum and butter could get you through half an hour of boredom, easy. And afterward, your breath smelled sophisticated. Not like bubble gum or chocolate. Like butter and warmth and something vaguely mysterious. Rum and Butter was another Lowney's product, part of that constellation of Canadian confectionery brands with serious heritage. The packaging never went glossy or modern. It stayed classic, which was part of the appeal for older buyers and part of the problem for younger ones. By the time the 2000s rolled around, hard candies were increasingly seen as old people candy. Kids wanted chocolate bars with multiple textures. They wanted sour candies that made their eyes water. They wanted gummies shaped like worms and sharks. Butterscotch flavors, even fancy rum butterscotch flavors, felt outdated. Parents who were health conscious didn't love the idea of rum flavoring, even though it was artificial. The name itself became a liability. And for Hershey Canada, which had acquired Lowney's, it was another low-margin product taking up valuable space. The decision was made. Rum and butter joined the list of discontinued heritage products. You can still find hard butterscotch candies, of course. Bulk candy stores sell generic versions. Some specialty shops in the Maritimes carry old-fashioned sweets that come close. But they're not the same. They don't have that distinctive rum note. They don't come in the brown and gold wrapper, and they don't carry the weight of memory that comes with the name. For Canadians over 40, rum and butter isn't just a flavor. It's the taste of being trusted, of feeling grown up, of sitting in your grandmother's living room on a Sunday afternoon. And that's something you can't buy anymore, no matter which aisle you check. Number 5. Big Turk. With its vivid purple wrapper and that bizarre, almost alien combination of Turkish delight covered in chocolate, it was the most divisive candy bar in Canada. You either loved it fiercely, or you couldn't understand why it existed at all. There was no middle ground. And that purple wrapper? You could spot it from across the store, calling to you like a beacon or a warning, depending on which camp you fell into. Here's what made Big Turk so unusual. The center wasn't caramel or nougat or peanut butter. It was Turkish delight. That chewy, jelly-like confection flavored with rose water that has been popular in the Middle East and Mediterranean for centuries, but never quite broke into mainstream North American taste. Covered in milk chocolate, it created a texture experience that shocked first-timers. The chocolate would crack, and then you'd hit that soft, bouncy center that was floral and perfumed and completely unexpected. People remember the exact moment they first tried one. The confusion, the realization that this was not what chocolate bars were supposed to taste like. Some people immediately loved the exotic sweetness. Others thought it tasted like eating chocolate-covered soap. There was no polite way to describe the divide. You were either a Big Turk person or you absolutely were not. But for those who loved it, the loyalty ran deep. They'd defend it passionately to friends who mocked their choice. They'd seek it out specifically, scanning candy racks in convenience stores and grocery checkout lanes. Finding one felt like a small victory. And there was something bonding about discovering another Big Turk fan. You'd found your people. You'd found someone else who understood that the rosewater flavor wasn't weird, it was sophisticated, different, special. Part of the appeal was knowing that Americans didn't have it. This was a Canadian thing. You couldn't walk into a store in Michigan or New York and find Big Turk. It confused American friends when they visited. That felt good. We had coffee crisp, ketchup chips, and Big Turk. They had none of these things. The purple wrapper became a symbol of Canadian candy identity, even if most Canadians didn't actually eat them regularly. Big Turk was made by Nestlé Canada, and here's what most people don't realize. It was never meant to be a mainstream hit. Nestlé knew it was niche. They positioned it as exotic and unique. The marketing never tried to convince everyone to love it. Instead, it leaned into the cult status. The wrapper design barely changed over decades because fans loved its retro look. It became the candy bar equivalent of that one weird friend everyone has who's into obscure music. You might not get it, but you respect the commitment. But niche products are vulnerable. In 2017, Nestlé made the announcement. Big Turk was being discontinued. Production had ceased. Sales had been declining for years, and the costs of making something with such limited appeal didn't make business sense anymore. Turkish delight had never broken into mainstream Canadian taste preferences beyond a devoted fan base. Focus groups showed that younger consumers increasingly preferred chocolate-only bars or combinations like chocolate and caramel. The unique texture that made Big Turk special had become a liability. It was too different in a market that rewarded familiarity. The reaction was immediate. Fans panicked. Social media lit up with people sharing their Big Turk memories, posting photos of their last bars, lamenting the loss. Petitions started circulating online, demanding Nestlé bring it back. And here's the thing, it worked. Sort of. In 2021, Nestlé brought Big Turk back due to popular demand. But the return was tentative. Availability remained spotty. You'd find it in some stores, but not others. Production runs were limited. It existed in this precarious space between discontinued and available, never quite secure. That's where Big Turk sits today. When fans find it on shelves, they often buy multiple bars, worried it'll disappear again. And they're probably right to worry. It represents something important about Canadian candy in the modern era. Uniqueness is expensive. Niche products require dedicated production lines, specialized ingredients, and shelf space that could go to higher volume items. In a market dominated by corporate consolidation and efficiency, there's less room for the weird, the unusual, the distinctly ours. Big Turk survives barely as a heritage product kept alive by loud fans and occasional nostalgia-driven sales bumps. But its future is never certain, and maybe that's fitting. The most divisive candy bar in Canadian history continues to divide opinion, even about whether it should exist at all. These weren't just candies you grabbed at the checkout. They were markers of identity, little pieces of what made growing up Canadian feel different from anywhere else. They were the reward after helping unload groceries, the treasure in your grandmother's purse, the treat that made the long winter walk to the corner store worthwhile. And losing them changed more than just what we found on candy racks. It changed something about the experience of being young in this country. What we lost wasn't just the flavors themselves, though we miss those too. It was the variety, the sense that Canadian companies made Canadian products for Canadian tastes. The corner stores and variety shops that carried them, run by people who knew your name and your usual order. The allowance spending rituals that taught us about choices and delayed gratification. The conversations with grandparents about how they ate the same candies when they were young. These treats connected generations in a way that's harder to replicate now. Corporate consolidation happened. American brands took over more shelf space. Efficiency became more important than variety. And the quirky, unusual, distinctly ours products were the first to go. That's the reality of modern retail. But remembering keeps them alive in a way that matters. When we share these memories, we're not just talking about candy. We're talking about childhood, about family, about the specific texture of growing up in this place, in this country, in a time that feels increasingly distant. So tell us, where in Canada did you grow up? Which of these candies do you remember? Which one do you miss the most? Drop your memories in the comments. We love hearing your stories. And if you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more Canadian nostalgia coming your way, because these treats shaped our childhoods. And even if we can't taste them anymore, we can still taste the memory. And that's something worth holding on to.